Battle Warrior podcast is kicking back in gear. I am in Oshkosh. We are in the Venture Project studio, guys, and we're going to come at you with a lot of big time guests. So stay tuned, guys. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. Battle Warriors out, y'all. New content coming soon. See ya.
Okay, we are on Zoom. We are recording, and I should have plugged it right before how you said it because that was just a gold line. I'll fill it in. Hey guys, completely forgot about putting an intro on my show here. Dean was just talking, and we were rolling, and he had a gold mine here, and we're talking about how we're instincts and how you feel it and you keep doing it or vice versa. He was bringing up how his calling was going a different direction and got in the car accident, and finally it took him to focus on his calling. And you're a lot like me just in the first 5 minutes what we were talking about here. I tend to do opposite what my calling's supposed to be and then have a natural event kind of hit me in the head and say, okay, hey buddy, here's your calling. I had the biggest smile on my face when you were talking about that. And apologize, guys. His name is actually Dean Fox, and I totally apologize again. But he is he's going to have a phenomenal story on this podcast here. But he works with business owners, entrepreneurs to end, and I'm going to use the term end, focus on the end, the top 4 destructive behavior: procrastination, fear of public speaking, fear of rejection, unlocking your true potential. So he goes against, or I'm saying not goes against, he goes in, fixes it. And then I'm guessing to unlock your full potential as a business, unlock your full potential as a customer, unlock your full potential as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And what he was talking about on the accident, actually, and this is where I should have started it, but like I said, I wanted to keep the gold to what you were saying in that improv. And pretty much what it was you were almost killed in an accident, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and like I said, it was one of those days where I'd probably had enough opportunities to make a decision not to be going in the direction I was going. And I'm a huge believer now. I would have struggled to say this, 11 years ago when the car accident happened, but I'm a huge believer now that everything happens for a reason. And sometimes I think that what happens is when we talk about purpose and we talk about calling, I think there's a lot of pressure on people these days because of these words get talked about a lot. Everybody's looking for, well, what's my purpose? What should I be doing? And you talked earlier on about feeling. And for me, I don't believe we find a purpose. I think it works the other way. I think purpose finds us. I think it kind of shows up at a point in our life when's the right time for us. All we have to do is kind of accept it, feel like it's the right thing, and step into it. And then it takes us where it needs to take us. And so, that's certainly what happened in my journey. We had a fairly serious car accident, as you said. And that was the first part of a turning point. Prior to that, I'd had a successful corporate career. I mean, my wife and I built a fairly successful real estate business. We lost that in the financial crisis between 2008, 2009. We had the car accident in 2010. I ended up bankrupt in the middle of that year because we were unable to work from recovering from the car accident. We'd already lost the business. I was heading in a downward spiral. And I talk about this a lot now, that this whole idea that there's a lot of pressure there's a lot of pressure on everyone, but I think from a male perspective, a lot of social and genetic conditioning around the fact that we are not supposed to talk about our feelings. We're not supposed to be struggling. We're not supposed to, be the ones who suffer. We're the ones who are supposed to be strong enough. We're the ones who are to provide for the family and all of those sorts of things. And that's essentially what happened to me. And I had a real difficult time from the car accident till the end of 2010, where I doubted myself, all of the self-doubt that I had in my life, and I'd had it for various times in my life, that started to come up again. But that pressure of trying to put on a brave face and not tell anyone what was going on, not talk about it, and keep, a stiff upper lip, as we'd say in the UK, but, to keep ourselves together and present a face to the world, it takes its toll. I often say I spent about 5 or 6 months of that period of time where I felt like I used to just get up one morning, get out of bed, felt like I was stepping into a swimming pool, and I swam against the current all day. And then I got out and I went to bed, and I got up the next day and did the same. And it was just like Groundhog Day over and over and over again. And it's both physically and mentally exhausting. And I talk about this downward spiral on the basis that that's what it felt like. I just felt like I was going, people talk about the light at the end of the tunnel, but that's what it feels like. It just feels like it's getting darker, as if you're kind of walking into something and you see no way out. And that's, ultimately what happened. My biggest turning point was in December of 2010. So 9 months after the car accident, I'd reached the lowest point for me. And I got up one morning. I said to my wife that I was going for a walk. I said, I need to clear my head. I need to think about where we're going and put some plans in place. That was one of those days when I was putting on a brave face, because that was a lie. That wasn't the truth. I left the house that morning. I had no intention of coming home. I went to some woodland near where we lived, and I made the decision I was going to take my own life. What happened that day, it's really difficult to describe, or would have found it really difficult to describe back then. The best way for me to describe it, it was almost as if I sat in the woodland and I made this decision that I didn't feel like I had anything left to give. I felt like I was running on empty. I had no more energy. I had no more fight left in me. I felt like my family would be better off without me, that they were in the position they were in because of me. And so I made this decision that I'm not going home. I feel the best way out for everybody and me is for me to end my life here. But when I made that decision, something strange happened, which was that having made the decision, I felt the calmest, the clearest, the less stressed, the least concerned and afraid than I'd felt for probably the previous 3 years. And I don't know how long that lasted. That might have just been a few seconds, or it might have been a few minutes. But in that space, it was almost as if someone lifted all of those things off me and said, I'm just going to give you a few moments to reflect without the pressure of all of that stuff. And all that allowed me to do was ask myself some questions. And I didn't get any answers. It wasn't as if I was like, okay, I asked the question and someone gives me an answer and I think, okay, this is what I'm doing. But what happened was, the biggest question I kept asking myself was, I could have died in a car accident 9 months ago. In fact, everybody who was witness to that day said there was no way that we should have survived, including the first responders on the scene. Why did I survive only to go through the things I'm going through now? There has to be a reason for that. Things don't just keep happening like that. There's a reason that these things happen. And maybe I should figure that out. And that was what brought me back, for want of a better phrase. It was a selfish reason about trying to understand why I was going through all the stuff I was going through. And that's why I say that we don't find a purpose, our purpose finds us, because it wasn't until a number of years later, as I started on my own journey of figuring this out for myself, who I am, why I felt the way I felt, why I often did some of the things I did, why I didn't do other things that I knew I should do, why I believed some of the things I did about myself. Where did that come from? How can I change it? While I started to figure some of that out, people started to see changes. And they asked me if I would share what I was doing, share some of my story, some of the things I'd been through. And as I shared that story, not only did it help me, because it was extremely emotional to do it at the beginning, not only did it help me, but people started to say they got something from it. It resonated with them. it was hugely helpful to them. And some people came up to me afterwards and said, do you think you could, I'm going through something similar, do you think you could help me? And I suddenly realized that's why I went through all those things. That's why the universe was telling me not to go down the path I was going. That's why I was involved in a car accident. And so now I look back at those events, and it sounds strange to some people, but I'm eternally grateful for all those things that happened in my life. And yeah, they were difficult. It was a tough time, but I wouldn't be where I am without any of those things. And I wouldn't be who I am today without any of those things. And so, not only am I grateful for it, but I'm also blessed that I now understand some of those things. And the reason that I went through them is to help other people who are going through them. So I have this idea now that everybody has a story, but our story is not for us. Our story is for other people. I said this to somebody yesterday. We're doing the world a disservice if we do not share that story, because somebody somewhere needs to hear it. We will come along at the right time for somebody. And if that's only one person, then that's enough, because that one person, we will have a ripple effect. That one person will also impact somebody else's life. And that's what got me into coaching and speaking and doing what I do. I had no intention of doing this 10 years ago. It was not on my plan, but I couldn't see myself doing anything else right now. This is who I am. And the other thing I think, when we embark on this journey about personal development and personal growth, and people are looking for change, they want to change things in their life. What I've realized is we don't change, we actually reveal. So we don't change to somebody else, we just reveal the truth about who we are. And that's when things start to change in our life, when we become who we're supposed to be, who we always were, but we've hidden it away by all these things that we've been conditioned to believe about ourselves and the world and the way it should be. So, for me, this idea of purpose and calling is something that comes to us. It kind of claims us, if you like, and all we need to do is be open to it. And that's certainly how it feels for me. And we talked about how it feels, earlier on, but that's certainly how it feels to me. And that's what, I feel alive when I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
I think, and to add into, there's one thing I'm going to add into that. And I think empathy is a good way of saying it too. Because I'm just sitting here like a big smile on my face, because I'm like reflecting back on exactly what I went through and all it is. And then now you're starting to not see the fruit of it, but you're like, I'm at that direction where it's like, I made that turn already. And now I'm being led slowly, but surely being led down the road I'm supposed to be led. Some people it comes fast, some people it's like, aha. And some people it's a little slow burner is what I call it.
Yeah.
It is really weird when that 180 occurs.
Yeah.
And that light bulb comes on, at least for us. So, the person that occurs to, it's like, we're just on fire for it. Let's go. Yeah. From the outsider looking in as like a family member, they're like, what just happened?
Yeah. Yeah. How did you go from this to this? Where are you going with it? Why are you doing that?
Yeah.
It's really difficult to see. I have this analogy that I use that, I feel sometimes like you're out in the field chasing a rabbit, but nobody else can see it. So to everybody else, you just look like some lunatic running about in the field because they can't see what you can see. And that's what it feels like, when you find what it is you're meant to be doing, it feels like you can see it, but nobody else can. And so you just look like some maniac running about, chasing something that no one else can see.
The most famous line that it remembers it to this day, two famous lines. A good friend of mine wrote when he came over here, and I'm going to leave his name out of it, but he sold his house. He had to crash my place for a little bit, and in the week into it, he wrote, and it's a motivational side, so it's more of like a faith-based, but he's like, nobody cares, work harder, in a good way. And I'm like, and I came in one day, I'm like, it was If it doesn't work, or if it doesn't hurt, your dream's not big enough. Nobody cares. Work harder. And it didn't resonate until like a month ago. And I'm like, why is this struggle so bad? And blah, blah, blah. And I look at that, I'm like, you're right. And then the light bulb comes on. And then someone else close to me said straight out, and me and him would joke around a little bit, but he's like, he goes, here's the difference when you're on your path. He's like, you see it, like what you're saying. You see it, you're going, you're all in, you're just going nuts about it. But he's like, someone coming in that doesn't see that, it's going to be like, what's going on? You're kind of cautious or whatever. And he's like, here's the difference. Like, what do you mean? He goes, that's your story. He's like, it's not our story. He's like, so you go all in on your story, or your purpose, your passion. He's like, that's specifically made for you only.
And I think the biggest change for me, and you know, from a coaching's perspective, I think that what happens is that when people feel like they are getting into that industry, or they want to get into that industry, you know, everybody has to make a living. So people often start by looking at it from a financial perspective, because that's what most people do when we talk about a business.
Yep.
But I heard something by Denzel Washington a number of years ago, and it you know, it's on my office wall, and it's something I've focused on every day since that point, which is that, I think he said it in a commencement speech, but he basically said that you shouldn't aspire to make a living, you should aspire to make a difference. And it was so powerful to me, because it was like, that's what it's about. The reason I do this is to make a difference. The money, the financial aspects come because of making a difference, because of the value you add. It doesn't come because you're trying to make a living. They come because you're trying to make a difference. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, because it makes a difference. And that is the difference for me between, you know, what I do. And you touched on something earlier about empathy, and the reason, one of the things I say to anybody who's looking at, you know, looking for a coach, or looking for help, or looking for a mentor, or looking for support, I always say the first question you should ask is, does that coach have a coach? That's the first thing, because anyone who thinks they know everything, then they're going to struggle. You're going to fall down at some point. The second thing is, have they walked in your shoes? Because that's the biggest thing for me. When I was looking for someone to help me, I was like, I want someone who's walked in my shoes. I want someone who knows how I feel right now and what it takes to get from where I am to where I want to be. I don't just want someone who's, you know, completed a qualification and says, I'm now qualified to help people. It's like, well, yeah, okay, that's great, but have you been there? Do you know what it feels like? Because if you don't, then there's a difference again there. You know, that makes a difference to me, and that's something that you know, forms the core of what I do and what I teach. Is I say to everybody, the reason I'm able to do this is because I was where you were. I feel the pain that you feel when you say some of the things that you say, because that's what I used to say to myself. So I know what it feels like.
I had this moment yesterday. I'm taking and I love this class, and there's going to be a repeating pattern of this on every podcast I do. It's a phenomenal class. I had a student in there, or not student. I'm a student with a different group in there, and I'll keep it as neutral as I can without, you know, getting involved with what's going on behind the scenes. But he came out, he's like, well, you know, I just came through bad breakup, I'm losing all this weight, I don't want to eat. Kind of like that first initial depression, all this stuff of what's going on with the relationship. And I'm just sitting there in a chair, and the older I'm getting, the more respectful I'm getting with allowing people to talk. Like, I have an issue where I want to one up. I knew I had that issue, and I'm trying, and it was more of an insecurity issue. And now I'm getting better in my journey, where it's like, you know what, I don't need to talk. Go ahead, guys, you know, talk away, and then I'll help you when you need to be helped. It's kind of a complete 180s. I still fight both sides, but I'm more on that route. And he kept going. He's like, well, what about this? What about that? How's it going to work, or whatever? And I'm sitting there, and the people around they're trying to answer it the correct way. And I'm like, all of a sudden I pause. I'm like, I looked at him. I looked at the teacher. I'm like, I got this. He's like, what do you mean? I'm like, I got this. I know exactly what he's going through. I know how he went through it. And I think it was a battle of like trying to get himself healthy, but he was having a mental break of the perception. It's like, I don't want to go down that route, or I'm going in this route, or I don't want to have additional add-ins to help with that route. We'll just say it that way. And I looked at him, I'm like, and I'm paraphrasing out of my mouth. I'm like, first of all, I'm on what you're fighting. I'm like, and it saved my life. I'm like, secondly, what you just go through, I said, I battled with that for 4 months because of my ex-wife getting pregnant behind my back or whatever. And all of a sudden, like, the room just got quiet. Like, I know exactly what you're going through. I'm like, I grabbed a nutty bar and could only eat half of it and wanted to throw it up. And I'm like, I lost 25 pounds in 30 days. And he just kind of looks and turns his head and kind of looks. And I'm like, I said, here's what's going to happen. I'm like, you're going to get to a point where your brain, I'm like, you're going to go through it. You're going to do whatever you need to do to gain weight. And it's not going to work. I'm like, and all of a sudden your brain's going to be like, the switch is going to flip and you'll be like, oh, this ain't that bad. And then you're going to slowly grow out of it. And I looked at him, I'm like, it's not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to be like a 3-4 month thing or 5 month. I'm like, it might even be a 2-3 year thing. You don't know. But it was first time in my life I like dropped my mouth. And I'm like, wow, this is really parallel. And I didn't really notice the events weren't the same, but the emotion and the layout and the process was the same.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing for me, is that, when you go through those steps, it doesn't matter what people, it doesn't have to be exactly the same scenario, but the process is the same. The emotions are the same. The things that we believe are the same. The changes we need to make to that belief system are the same. And when you start to do that, that's when things change. Ultimately, all of our results are driven by actions and behaviors. The problem is most people stop there. That's where their focus is, on changing actions and behaviors. But actions and behaviors are a direct result of how we feel, and feelings are a direct result of what we think. And people don't go far enough back. So if you want to change the results, you've got to start with thinking. You start at the top and you work your way down, because everything gets easier from there on in. It's like skiing downhill. If you try to do it the other way, it's tough. You try and change actions, behaviors there. It's really difficult.
I do know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's not going to be that easy.
No, especially if you're on a double black diamond and you got the ice wall right behind you.
So, but that's what happens to most people, because first of all, they don't understand, and secondly, they've never experienced it. They never get beyond the stage of looking at, well, when I do this, I get this result. So if I change the action, then I'll get a different result. 100% of the time. The problem is actions are not, they're not separate. They're linked directly to what you feel, and feelings are linked to what you think. So you can't separate them out and say, well, I'll change the actions. The only way to change that is to change the feelings and the thoughts that go with it. So you have to start there if you want to make the change long-term or permanent, which is why I talk about ending things, because for me, all the things that I ever experienced, the reason I ended up going down this route and developing a program is that everything I tried worked for a short period of time. And then I was back where I started again after 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever it was. Just going back around this loop all the time. And I tried to figure out why that was. And the reason is that all of the strategies, all of the techniques, all of the stuff that we learn, that I've read, people told me that I would say, okay, I'll implement this into my life. It's just another habit. It's just another thing that you have to do on a daily basis. But unless you keep that going, then you just snap back to where you were before. And I wanted to understand why that was. Why do we end up going back to this idea? And I came up with an analogy that helps explain it when I was playing. So, the wooden block game, Jenga.
Yep.
So I use that as an analogy with all my clients. So if you imagine the wooden tower being a pattern of behavior. So the four most destructive ones I talk about, let's pick one of those. So let's say we talk about a fear of public speaking as an example. That's a pattern of behavior, just like the Jenga tower. When we start to work on ourselves, when we try and learn something that will hopefully improve or reduce our fear of public speaking, we would do things, as an example, like we might learn some techniques around breathing. We might learn some strategies about body language and how we stand and tone of voice and the way that we speak. And all of those things are like taking blocks out of the Jenga tower. And it becomes unstable, which is why we feel better about things. We start to think, oh, I feel better about this now. I feel a bit more confident. But the tower doesn't collapse. It still stands. And as long as it still stands, the pattern of behavior will repeat at some point. 6 months, 6 days, 6 years, who knows? But it'll continue to repeat because the pattern hasn't collapsed. And so I was trying to figure out, that's why I realized, okay, so that's why I keep going back around the loop. Okay, so the next step is, first of all, if I could figure out what all the blocks were under one of those towers for a particular behavior pattern, I could remove those blocks. And in terms of a pattern of behavior, those blocks are just mental blocks. They're just beliefs, conditionings, things that we believe about ourselves. If I figured out what they were that supported that particular behavior pattern, that particular tower, I could remove them. And if I removed them all, there wouldn't be a tower anymore, and I wouldn't have the behavior pattern anymore. And that would free me to do whatever I wanted. That was my journey. That was what I was looking to do. What I also discovered, though, is if you think about the Jenga tower, there's probably about a dozen blocks in there, maybe even less, that you could remove and the tower would collapse anyway, without taking away them all. And so what I've also learned from that is that each of us, because of our experiences, because of the journey we've gone on in our life, particularly as a young child, each of us has got our own combination of those. So there might be 25 individual blocks that support the tower of fear of public speaking. But each of us might only have 12 or 13, but there are different 12 or 13. There might be some common ones, but ultimately we have our own combination, and it's like cracking into safes. It's like finding the combination for an individual, because once I find the combination, once we understand which it is, then we only have to work on those. And as soon as the tower collapses, everything changes because we've worked at that level. So they feel differently. Well, they will, because we've changed their thinking about it now. We've changed their belief system. So they feel differently. Their feelings mean they act differently. If they act differently, they're going to get different results. That's the core of what I do. And I did that simply because I struggled with all of the other things, all of the other systems. And I talk about it and the idea of, it's like putting you have an injury, a wound. It's like putting a Band-Aid on it. If you just keep putting them on all the time and you don't ever treat the wound, if you don't ever treat the underlying issue, it's never going to get better. So that for me was the biggest change. That was the biggest thing I learned that I started to implement in my life that I now use with all of my clients, is this whole idea of, well, let's not just use these short-term techniques and put Band-Aids on things. Let's treat it at the root cause. Let's go back to, right at the beginning, belief systems, identity, thinking. Let's solve it there, because everything else you ski downhill to. And that's why you can make change far faster than most people believe you can.
And yeah, and you lead people out of the dust even without even trying.
Absolutely. Because ultimately what happens is most people think that change is difficult and it takes a long time.
Yep.
But that's a belief in itself. So the answer to that question is, well, it always will. Change will always be difficult, take a long time. If you believe change is difficult and takes a long time. But the reason that you believe that is because you've tried things that have been difficult and taken a long time. What if you tried something that didn't take a long time and wasn't difficult? Then you might not have that belief anymore. And so when we want to make these changes in our life, and change is always an external thing. We're always looking for change in the external. But for me, it's like some of the biggest heists in the world. change is an inside job. You've got to work from the inside. We don't work outside in, we work inside out. So we change the belief system, the identity, and everything on the outside starts to change. And that's what happens. It's what happened for me. It's what happens to everybody else. And in that journey, the other thing I learned is that most people are seeking something on the outside, an external replacement for something to make them happy. Because most people in general just want to feel happy. But we're looking for something external to make us feel happy. The truth is, happiness is not something we get. It's something we are. And when we are, everything else changes. If we're always looking for something external, and I went through this, I had what I call this when-then mentality. When I get this, then I'll be happy. When I drive this car, then I'll be happy. When I earn this much money, then I'll be happy. The problem with then mentality is that the when happens, but the then never comes. Because then you go, I've got this car. I don't feel any different. Okay, well, I now need to set a new when. And we're just on another treadmill. Next. We're just searching all the time for something outside of us to make us feel the way that we should feel on the inside.
Yeah, you just hit the nail on the head on that. Because I'm looking at it going, I'm like, okay, I was that. And I'm like, okay, I'm just shutting up here and letting him just hit me with the bat. So,
but ultimately, that's the truth.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said, ultimately, that's the truth. That's the way that it works. And when we come to that conclusion, that's when things can change, and can change rapidly for us.
Awesome. Where can my listeners take advantage, or vice versa? Where can my listeners get a hold of you where they can have the same Jenga strip down rebuild that you did?
So they can find me on most of the social media platforms. I'm at Dean Fox Coaching. They can get me on my website, which is deanafox.com or deanfoxcoaching.com. And on my website, they can reach out to me directly through there as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, man. We're going to end the show. It's like I said, you're the last one of the day. And I went through a big grind. So I enjoyed every moment with you, man. And I actually be very glad to have you back down the road.
It's a pleasure. And always happy to share some value.
All right. Thank you very much, man. You have a great night.
And you. Take care now.
Yep. Thank you.